6 of them were Asian women. The current motive given by the shooter himself is that he had a sex addiction and saw these spas as a source of temptation. So, 8 people died because of his inability to control his penis, and how he blamed Asian women for it. The investigators are currently not calling it a hate crime though, because the shooter himself said that it wasn't racially motivated. Okay, so he drove past all the strip clubs in Atlanta and killed 6 Asian women at 3 different Asian-owned spas, but race had nothing to do with it? They want us to believe that it was one giant coincidence? Here's the thing, people don't get to decide whether or not they're being racist. Being racist is not an either you are or you aren't thing. Racism is rooted in action more than intent. When we have all grown up in a society structured on racial inequality, we all have the capacity to do racist things, even unconsciously. What matters is whether you also have the capacity to acknowledge this reality and make an active effort to push back against the racial biases you feel and see. I've seen some people say the spas were only chosen because strip clubs are more well defended than them, and he's not racist because he also killed 2 non-Asians. And I'm just... Can we stop? Can we stop gaslighting people of color about whether racism exists just because you don't want to acknowledge how deeply it's entrenched everywhere? Can we stop with the mental gymnastics to explain why something isn't racist when the consequences of the actions on a specific community of color, my community, are so clear? There is no competition between racism and misogyny. They are not mutually exclusive motives. This hate crime happened at their intersection. Because of his sex addiction claim, there's been a lot of assumptions floating around about whether these spas offered sexual services. But right now, as of the day I'm recording this video, there is no evidence that any of the victims were actually sex workers. The 6 Asian women killed were ages 44 to 74, and at least 2 of them were licensed massage therapists. Even if it turns out that some of them were sex workers, they still wouldn't have deserved any kind of violence. But the fact that the shooter brought his sex addiction into this means he assumed they were sex workers, which shows that he bought into stereotypes about Asian women. And the way people reacted to the possibility that they were sex workers, making happy ending jokes and saying these women deserved what happened to them, it's once again highlighted how vulnerable sex workers are when their profession is so stigmatized and criminalized, especially sex workers of color. Listen, no matter what a woman is doing, no matter what she is wearing, no matter if she chose to do sex work while knowing it's a dangerous profession, she is not consenting to be violently murdered. Society is way too obsessed with putting the responsibility on women to police their actions so men can pretend like they are incapable of controlling themselves. I don't believe men are mindless monsters. I don't believe men get so possessed by their rage and anger that they physically cannot control themselves. I believe that there is always a point where these violent offenders consciously decide that control is no longer important. And the more excuses society makes for them, the lower this threshold becomes. It's true that we can't predict which men will become violent and why and when, so it's always better to stay vigilant. But as soon as we start asking, well, what was she doing when these violent crimes happen, we create a societal environment that implies that as soon as a woman steps beyond the realm of acceptable female behavior, she is seen as free game for assault and murder. This mass shooting was premeditated. It was not an act of madness. The shooter chose to buy a gun, shoot up an Asian-owned spa, drive 40 minutes to a second Asian-owned spa, head across the street to a third Asian-owned spa, and then he was apparently about to drive to Florida to shoot up more. He was a frequent customer of some of these spas because he clearly fetishized Asian women. I don't want to hear any devil's advocates against this. The devil does not need an advocate. Asian women have had a long history of being fetishized and over-sexualized in the Western context. The first Chinese women to land in the US, Afal Moy, was brought over by 2 white male merchants to be paraded around as an exotic spectacle, then was eventually abandoned in poverty by them and ended up in P.T. Barnum's circus. The first restrictive federal immigration law in the US was the Page Act of 1875, and it effectively closed the open borders for the first time to prevent Oriental women from entering, because they were believed to be nothing but prostitutes. And then imperialism and the world wars and US military presence in Asia caused Asian women to be seen as war trophies. Somehow there's this perception that Asian women are more docile and submissive, even though, have you met an Asian auntie? Now, I'm actually non-binary, but the high femme way I present makes most people treat me like an Asian woman, so I'm including myself with them when I'm talking about this. The news of this shooting shook us. The insidious side effect of hate crimes is that it makes all the identity-related traumas in your past resurface. Asian women were all reminded of the times we were harassed, violated, or assaulted by those who fetishized us. We all have stories. We have all been reminded that there is a significant portion of society out there that leers at us as objects of sexual desire instead of human beings. It's made us all wonder, which one of us is next? How many more of us will die at the hands of some guy because of his yellow fever? I really hope the news starts calling him a terrorist, because I feel plenty terrorized. This is why it doesn't matter if the shooter himself says he wasn't motivated by racism. His crime has created all the social impacts of a hate crime. It cannot be ignored that this shooting happened in a time where anti-Asian hate crimes are spiking in general, up 150% since last March, and mostly against women and elders, committed by people who were told to blame China for COVID so they wouldn't scrutinize how their own governments failed to control this pandemic. Even the sheriff who reported on the shooter was found to have shared Facebook posts with racist anti-China COVID shirts. Is it a wonder that he tried to get us to empathize with the shooter? Just had a bad day? Would he have tried to spread that rhetoric if the shooter was a black or brown man? We're all having a bad year. Should we legalize the purge? I used to feel safe. I used to joke that as a short, young Asian girl, I'm the least threatening category of person and that I always get waved through in one try at airport security. Which actually isn't even true. Whenever I come back from China, I get scrutinized to hell and back for potentially bringing in counterfeit luxury stuff. But there was some part of me that bought into the model minority myth, that thought, well, at least we Asians have a good reputation for being peaceful, so people don't fear and hate us so much that they would gun us down in the streets. We only have to worry about being made fun of, being overlooked, being ignored, being sneered at, and not being taken seriously. Well, clearly, I was wrong. The hatred for us has always been simmering under the surface of society, and as soon as things turn to crap in a way that's associated with China, all Asian diaspora are now being targeted for violence, because people can't even be bothered to tell us apart. Now I'm left wondering how I could have been so naive. I even know my diaspora history. Asians and Chinese people specifically were the original foreign peril in Canada and the US. Their immigration laws were created because white people wanted to shut Chinese people out, even though these two countries could not have been built without Chinese labor. Chinese people built the backbones of Canada and America. For example, my province, British Columbia, joined the Canadian Federation in 1871 on the condition that a railway be built to link it to Eastern Canada within 10 years. Many politicians wanted the labor force to be recruited from Britain so they can maintain their image of a white Canada, but the Prime Minister John A. Macdonald broke it to them that using exclusive British labor would cost far too much, so they had to either use Chinese labor or not have the Transcontinental Railroad at all. The dilemma was similar in America, and so extensive Chinese labor was used to build railroads there as well. These Chinese laborers lived in atrocious conditions and were only paid a fraction of what white workers were being paid for the same work, and they handled the most dangerous and difficult stretches. Hundreds, maybe thousands died while blasting through mountain ranges. Avalanches sometimes buried entire camps. They were pushed to finish the railroads years ahead of schedule. Then, when it came time to take the big celebration photos of the railroad's completions, the white employers cleared the Chinese laborers out of view before making a show of driving in the last bike themselves. Then they proceeded to talk about the projects as if they were pulled off by brave and innovative white pioneers instead of by up to a 90% portion of Chinese laborers, who weren't even allowed citizenship. Canada and America are only considered white nations because of the deliberate exclusion of people of color and the erasure of their work by white supremacists. And this notion that only white people are true Canadians and Americans caused those of Japanese descent to be herded into internment camps in World War II, even though their families may have been here for generations. Certain white people wonder why the PC crowd nowadays have to bring race into everything. Well, this is the answer. Race matters because your white ancestor made it matter. Because your white ancestors built a racial hierarchy and put themselves on top, and you are still reaping the benefits of inequalities that were never fully fixed. This is also why these conversations single white people out. You have to realize what's been happening to everyone else because the world was violently shaped by colonization to prop you up. Some white people treat the term racist as if it's a slur against them and are more concerned with arguing why this or that isn't racist than doing the introspection to understand why people of color are feeling the way they do. Don't be one of them. Yes, people of color also have the capacity to be racist, but it's white people who overwhelmingly hold the power to turn their racial biases into systemic oppression. If us singling out white people makes you uncomfortable when we're addressing issues of systemic racism, you are part of the problem. You are choosing to turn a blind eye to power dynamics because it makes you feel bad. We were not asking you to sob in white guilt every day. Actually, it's very annoying when you do that in front of people of color, because it forces them to do the emotional labor of comforting you, and it's pretty transparent that what you really want is to get patted on the back and be assured that you're a good person. So no sobbing. What we're asking you to do is to educate yourself and become more aware of the things people of color have to face, but you don't. Understand that white privilege doesn't mean that you're all born with a golden ticket to life, but that your ticket doesn't automatically mark you for systemic discrimination and violence. An example of white privilege? How this armed shooter was taken in alive even after killing 8 people. I will leave some links in the description below to resources you can read and ways you can help, but what it comes down to is making yourself aware of the anti-Asian violence that's going on, donating if you can, speaking up against any anti-Asian racism you see, and amplifying Asian voices. A huge reason that these hate crimes are happening, that Asians who aren't even Chinese are being targeted because of anti-China rhetoric, is because so many people see us as an indistinguishable monolith. And that can't be fixed unless you hear our own stories and realize how different we are. You can't go out and meet Asian people in a pandemic, I know, but you can read books written by us, watch movies made by us, watch documentaries, watch TED Talks, read articles. Just go out and learn and broaden your worldview. I do my best on this channel and in my books to share my perspective as a first-generation Chinese immigrant to Canada, but I'm not enough. You should seek out other Asian creators too. I've been thinking a lot about the role media plays in egging these hate crimes on. Not just Trump and his China-blaming nonsense, but also the daily legitimate reports about the terrible things the Chinese government is doing, like arbitrarily detaining 2 Canadians to bully Canada into releasing Meng Wanzhou, committing genocide against the Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities, cracking down on Hong Kong's democracy, pulling shady neo-colonialist moves in Southeast Asia and Africa, and much, much worse. And we should criticize the Chinese government. International pressure is the only thing that can get them to back off, but I'm wondering what this non-stop positioning of China as an ominous foreign boogeyman does to the perception of Chinese people as a whole and other Asians and Pacific Islanders by extension. I used to not flinch when people would say China withheld information about COVID, or China is playing the long game to world domination, because I instinctively know that they're talking about the Chinese government, not ordinary citizens. Because I, as someone who was born and raised in mainland China, I'm well aware that the Chinese government does not represent me. But now I'm wondering if the average person who grew up in the West can conceptualize this. If they're aware that the average Chinese citizen has no political power or influence over whether these atrocities are happening. You hear a lot about what the Chinese government is doing, but do you ever hear about what's happening in China for ordinary people? Do you have any idea what they're thinking? Whenever I speak up against white supremacy and the lingering impact of Western colonialism, there's always some guy in my comments who is like, well, China has a Han supremacist problem and is colonizing Africa right now. Yes? And? I criticize both the Chinese and Western governments. But somehow, just because of my name and face, some people equate me to this ominous evil in their minds that is China. We can talk all day about how I don't even have Chinese citizenship anymore, I'm legally a Canadian, but I don't want to make it seem like it'd be okay to see all citizens of the People's Republic of China as the enemy either. If you want to know what it's like for an average Chinese citizen, imagine if Trump and his goons appointed themselves your government leaders because of their connections, and you had absolutely no option of voting them out. Imagine not even being able to criticize Trump without worrying that the police might pay you a visit. My family sees the stuff American comedians say about Trump. They see a selfie I took with Justin Trudeau, and they are stunned. In China, politicians don't go on campaigns to win support. They don't take selfies with random people. They do what their higher-ups tell them to do. It's like ordinary citizens are base-level employees at a massive company, and civil servants are the managers. We occasionally hear stuff about the top bosses, like Xi Jinping, but ultimately, we have no influence on the direction they decide to take the company. And in everything we say in public, we have to maintain the position of, oh yeah, our company is the best. However, most mainland Chinese people that I know are not blindly loyal to the CCP. They've just been conditioned to not voice dissent out of fear of punishment. But the grievances have their own way of slipping out. There are endless sensitive terms that get automatically blocked on Chinese social media, but discussions still happen using all sorts of slang to bypass the filters. The Chinese people are always one step ahead of the censors. We make jokes about getting invited to tea whenever we say something out of line, we laugh at government propaganda, we use VPNs to go on YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, we mock the socialist values Xi Jinping loves to talk about because we're well aware that China hasn't attempted socialism in decades and it is in fact one of the most capitalist countries on Earth. If it were true that all mainland Chinese people are brainwashed, the government wouldn't need to crack down so hard on free speech. I am Chinese, but I do not feel proud that the Chinese government is getting so powerful. It even makes me feel hopeless sometimes when I think about how other countries are too tangled up in their own messes and too economically dependent on China to seriously stand up to the CCP. And Chinese citizens themselves have too much to lose to rise up in a mass revolution. It is so infuriating to see that a few hundred people up high in the CCP have their grip on that much power, and there's currently no reliable force out there that we can depend on to take them down. This is not what I want the future to look like. I do not want the world to end up in a second world war that, God forbid, escalates beyond cold. But at the same time that we're rightfully calling the CCP out for its atrocities, Western media has to be careful to not do it in a way that leads to the demonization of Chinese people and other Asians. My friend Enxi wrote a great article on how so many publications claim they're only talking about the Chinese government when they're saying China, but the language and imagery they use still play into xenophobic tropes and stereotypes, and so they end up feeding into this image of Chinese people as this vague evil looming over the world. It's yellow peril yet again. There needs to be nuance when we talk about China. There needs to be a healthy balance of good and bad. We shouldn't overly demonize and we shouldn't overly glamorize. And we especially need to make the distinction that the Chinese government, the CCP, does not represent the will of the Chinese people. We need to amplify more individual Asian voices so we're not all grouped under the vague threat of China. The balance is not easy to find, I know. I try my best to give a balanced view to demystify Chinese culture, and I've been accused of being both a Chinese nationalist propaganda spreader and a sellout who lies to white people for clout. Okay. Ultimately, I'm just one Chinese person sharing my perspective because I'm tired of people knowing nothing about China and Chinese culture, but making assumptions anyway. I have no reason to lie. I'm not pushing an agenda for any country's government, not China's, not Canada's, and definitely not America's. I only care about promoting the respect of human rights. I am one person making content in quarantine. I do all the writing and editing myself. If something seems off about the things I share, it's probably because the Chinese experience varies hugely. Contradictions inevitably exist. Even the word Chinese itself is really this cumbersome umbrella term that encompasses way too much. So, I am again urging you to consume more media by creators of Asian descent. Not just Chinese ones, but those of all Asian ethnicities. Only when you hear our unique stories can you see how different we are. I have book recommendations on my Instagram and website, and in the future I will make videos recommending more content, but that's still gonna be stuff I like and reflect my tastes, so you should definitely seek out Asian created content beyond that. Part of being a good ally is proactively doing the work to seek out resources and learn instead of asking people of color to spoon feed you. Finally, I want to talk about the victims of the shooting. Xiao Jie Tan, who went by Emily, was 49. She was a licensed massage therapist and owned Young's Asian Massage in another spa in Atlanta. She had a daughter who recently graduated from the University of Georgia. It would have been her 50th birthday on Thursday the 18th. Delana Ashley Young was 33 and was out for a spa day with her husband, who was uninjured. She worked at a Waffle House near Emily's spa and had a 14-year-old son and 9-month-old daughter. Paul-Andre Michels was 54, and he was an Army veteran who owned a business installing security systems. He was doing maintenance work for Emily's spa and might have also been there to speak to her because he was thinking about opening his own spa. Dao Youfeng was 44. She was only recently hired by Emily's spa. Unfortunately, as of the making of this video, we don't know anything else about her. Hyunchan Grant, whose family prefers her maiden name Hyunchan Kim, was 51. She was a single mother who dedicated her life to supporting her 2 sons. Her eldest son Randy couldn't even retrieve her body because her legal family name is different from his, and he couldn't find the paperwork to prove he was her next of kin. Sun Cha Kim was 69. She was a spa worker and a grandmother who was married for over 50 years and immigrated from Korea to the US to give her family a better life. She liked to line dance in her spare time. Sun Chun Park was 74. She was also a spa worker, got along with her family very well, and lived in New York before moving to Atlanta. Yeon A-yu was 63. She was born in Korea and married a US soldier stationed there before moving to the US in the 70s. They divorced in the 80s, but they had 2 sons together, and their families remained close. You can donate to support the families of these 8 people in a fundraiser by the Atlanta chapter of the nonprofit organization Asian Americans Advancing Justice, which I will leave a link to in the description below, along with a community fund that will go to other trusted Asian American and Pacific Islander organizations. Even if you can't help financially, you can still create change by spreading awareness. I urge you to please share this video and to take the initiative to broaden your worldview so stereotypes and demonization aren't all you see.
With all the legal upset caused by the U.S. Supreme Court this year, there's been a lot of talk about how the highest court in the land functions and whether it's still functioning the way it's supposed to. Is this how courts in similar countries function? Is there a way to improve how it functions so it's not just making up laws or throwing out laws after literal decades of precedent, and so it's not allowing for political power plays by letting a single president appoint a large portion of the bench with no term limits in sight, or allowing justices to retire at opportune moments to benefit one party or the other? This can't be the only way, right? Right. Today we're going to look at how other countries' Supreme Courts function and whether it might make sense to move away from the monstrosity that we currently have. Let's discuss. You know what I like to do when the weight of the world feels overwhelming? Sleep. I love to sleep. I prioritize sleep above, I think, literally everything else. If I don't get a full 8 hours, I'm a monster. And I love my bed. Having a good bed, as you probably know, is important to getting good sleep. And I'd like to thank my sponsor for today's video, Helix Sleep. Helix Sleep makes premium mattresses and bedding that are customized to fit your needs and conveniently shipped right to your door. Helix made a sleep quiz that you can take to match your unique body and sleep preferences, because everyone's different and needs different things out of their mattress. And Helix Sleep has something for everyone's unique taste. And if you share your bed with a partner, you can even take the quiz together to find a good compromise for both of you. Based on my results, Helix matched me with their Midnight mattress, which I obviously upgraded to a luxe because I only deserve the best, frankly. I'm a side sleeper. I do the running man position, you know, like I'm trying to run away in my sleep. I love a middle of the road firmness, very Goldilocks, not too soft, not too firm. And then you can personalize the mattress even more by adding the Glacio Tex cooling cover, which helps keep the bed cool and comfortable, which has been absolutely essential during the hot summer months. I've had my Helix mattress for about 2 months now, and it truly is really comfortable. I get great sleep on it, which is imperative because as a 30-year-old lady, one wrong turn, and I have neck pain for a week now. So I need a mattress that can support this old bag of bones. And it was really easy to have it just shipped right to my door. The shipping is free and it comes rolled up in a box, so it's super easy to set up. An absolute all-around win. With your Helix Sleep mattress, you get a 100-night sleep trial along with a 10-year warranty. And there are financing options and flexible payment plans available as well. So if you're nervous to buy a mattress that you haven't had a chance to try out, you get more than 3 months to make sure that you love it. And if you don't, they'll literally come to your house and pick it up for you and you'll get a full refund. I love my Helix and I think you will too. If you're looking for a brand new bed, check out Helix. Click the link in the description or go to helixsleep.com/Legia for up to $200 off your Helix Sleep mattress plus 2 free pillows. And there are some really great pillows too. Thanks, Helix. All right, let's just go over the basics of how the U.S. Supreme Court works. The Supreme Court was created by the U.S. Constitution. Article 3 is all about the judiciary. Section 1 of Article 3 says, "The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. The judges, both of the Supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior and shall at stated times receive for their services a compensation which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office." Side note, I recently kind of blew up on TikTok because I literally read the entire U.S. Constitution out loud on TikTok, and one of my videos in my U.S. Constitution playlist is just me reading the entirety of Article 3. So if you really want the whole thing read to you, go check it out there, where I'm also going to go over other bite-sized snippets all about constitutional law. My handle is @LegiaMiller. Shameless plug. Anyway, okay, so Article 3 basically says there's a Supreme Court. Congress can make other inferior courts like district courts and circuit courts. It says that the judges get to hold their offices during plug. Anyway, okay, so Article 3 basically says there's a Supreme Court. Just me reading the entirety of Article 3. So if you really want the whole thing read to you, go check it out there, where I'm also going to go over other bite-sized snippets all about constitutional law. My handle is @LegiaMiller. Shameless plug. Anyway, okay, so Article 3 basically says there's a Supreme Court. Congress can make other inferior courts like district courts and circuit courts. It says that the judges get to hold their offices during good behavior and that they should be paid at stated times. Section 2 then goes on to lay out what types of cases the Supreme Court has jurisdiction over, basically federal cases where federal or constitutional law is involved, and anything that lower federal courts have heard. And that's it. That's all the Constitution says about the Supreme Court, what it does, and how it should function. It left the rest to Congress to decide. In the Judiciary Act of 1789, the Congress created the rules around the Supreme Court. It created a Supreme Court with 6 total justices, 1 Chief Justice, and 5 Associate Justices. So 9 justices was not set in stone, if by set in stone you mean written into the Constitution. In fact, the number of justices on the Supreme Court has changed 6 times before settling on a total of 9. Congress officially settled on 9 justices in 1860. 1769. Before that year, however, Congress made it a regular practice to change the number of justices to achieve its own partisan political goals. The most there have ever been is 10, which happened during old Abe Lincoln's tenure in office. There have also been some major changes in how the court functions since the mid-1800s. For example, in the Judiciary Act of 1789, the Congress also created district courts and then a number of circuit courts. Those circuit courts at that time didn't have their own separate judges. Instead, they were staffed by one district court judge from the region and then 2 Supreme Court justices. And these circuits were located throughout the US. And this is like the 17 and 1800s. And the justices had to travel around the country to each circuit to hear cases. And so they